Welcome to the sixth round for our MMA weigh-in studios in downtown Dallas. I'm Navid Razi, joined by award-winning journalist for MMA Junkie and USA Today, John Money Morgan from Las Vegas, Nevada. And John, we wanted to wait a few days to kind of sit back and take in what we saw in the Anderson Chris Weidman fight, take some time to pinch ourselves, rub our eyes a little bit, make sure what we saw really just happened, and also see what the fallout would be from Anderson Silva actually losing his first fight in the UFC and his first title fight. Not in a million years, I think, did either one of us think we would see Anderson Silva get knocked out on the feet by Chris Weidman.
No, I mean, even if you make the case that Chris Weidman's going to win the fight, you assume it's probably going to be by submission, maybe outlasting him by decision, wrestling him the way that Chael Sonnen was able to do. But I'll be honest, never in a million years did I see Chris Weidman knocking Anderson Silva out. And it was a shocking finish to me, man. It really was. And the fallout has just been incredible. I mean, I can tell you on MMAJunkie.com, some of our busiest days ever, and the busiest traffic that we still have, even 2 weeks later, is in regards to UFC 162. Anything we put up on Anderson Silva or Chris Weidman, that's what people are clicking on. So, I mean, even after all this time, that's what people still care about. That's how huge this story really was.
Yeah, and before we get into the actual fight and breaking it down, I want to make the point, because it might sound kind of funny what we're about to say, but at the end of the day, John, Chris Weidman, he caught Anderson Silva with a punch and knocked him out. He won that fight, and as impossible as it is to do this, we shouldn't take anything away from his victory. Unfortunately, we live in the real world, and we're human, and it doesn't really work like that necessarily. And I think sometimes we're completely over the top when it comes to everything, not just fighting, but everything in life, politics, religion, all that stuff. But when it comes to criticizing someone, praising someone, and Chris Weidman obviously knocked out one of the greatest fighters of all time, and that's that. But I think people are getting a little too extreme, John, as we relive the fight. Weidman fought a very good fight. Say what you will about Anderson Silva's performance, and yes, I realize that he lost by knockout, but we've seen this scenario play out several times before, and every time Silva has done this and actually won, it almost adds to his untouchable legacy. He loses in this fight against Chris Weidman, and now he's getting crucified for it, and I'm hearing a lot of talk about how Anderson Silva didn't really land a single strike in this fight, and Weidman owned him the entire fight. And I don't really think that's the case, Sean. It sounds foolish to say this since Anderson Silva got knocked out by Chris Weidman, but there have been countless times where we've seen Anderson Silva take his time with his opponents, feel them out, measure them, get a feel for their length and their speed, and then in the later rounds, he absolutely dismantles them. He absolutely landed some very hard leg kicks in this fight. He landed a few jabs in the first round that caught Chris Weidman's attention, backed him up, and kind of stunned him in the first round. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that Chris Weidman completely owned Anderson Silva, given the fact that we know how Anderson Silva fights, and this is kind of typical Anderson Silva. The only thing is that I think he probably did it a little too long and wasn't expecting Weidman to come out as aggressive as he did in that second round.
No, I think you make a great point, because the two things that I've heard about this fight and criticisms are either A, Anderson Silva clowned way too much, or B, even those, nutballs that said the fight was fixed or somehow thrown. In either scenario, you're basically taking away from Chris Weidman, and I don't think you should take away from Chris Weidman. First of all, if we even need to address the conspiracy theorists, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
If he's going to throw the fight, tap out to the heel hook, tap out to the leg lock. Nobody knows exactly how much torque and how much pressure is on that joint. You can get away with it easy. You don't throw the fight by getting knocked unconscious.
And then of all people, Anderson Silva, probably the richest fighter in the UFC next to GSP. What's in it for him? This is so stupid. Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to come with huge money, so it just doesn't make any sense. So, enough about that. But, yeah, the other thing, I remember watching the fight live. I turned to Thomas Trebasi, who was sitting next to me, and Kevin Iole, and I said, man, you know what? I think Weidman won that first round, but I think he's in trouble right now, because it seemed like once Weidman got the fight to the ground in the opening round and went for the heel hook. First of all, he was landing some pretty good shots in the ground and pound. And he actually said afterwards, I think I could have finished it there, but I wanted to do something a little more spectacular. So he dropped back with a submission. I actually had a fan hit me up on Twitter and be like, dude, the look on your face was priceless. So I had to go back and watch the video, not even meaning to. I saw the heel hook go in, and I was like, I can't believe what we're about to see here. But Anderson got through it. He twisted, he turned, he survived, he got up. And to me, it looked like I don't want to say Chris Weidman was tired. Maybe he had that little energy dump of where he was in, all that adrenaline. You think back to a Shane Carwin, Brock Lesnar type situation where, man, the challenger is about to do it. But it looked to me like Chris had lost a little bit of a zip in his step. He got back into the clinch a couple more times and really didn't look like he didn't know how to get the fight to the floor. At that point, looked a little frustrated. And Anderson was doing what he does. He's clowning. He's getting you out of your game. And I thought, man, you know what? Chris had his chance, and he's in trouble now. Anderson's really going to take this over in the second frame. But then Anderson got caught. Plain and simple, Anderson got caught. So, I'm not, and then again, going back to the other criticism, the Anderson clowns too much. You're right, man. If Anderson, we've seen Anderson do this before. And if Anderson moves that chin out of the way 1 inch and misses that punch, that it was that last, that left hand that came through. If he avoids that and comes back with a big right over the top and scores a knockout, we're all sitting in there going, this guy's the greatest ever. He's got to go fight John Jones now. Nobody will ever beat him at 185. But instead, because of that, now we're saying he clowns too much. Now we're saying that's his style. It's what he does. It's what made him great. So, I have no criticism, so to speak, of Anderson Silva. Was it too much? Maybe, but that's why we like watching Anderson Silva, man. If everybody came out and had fought the same way, the sport would be kind of boring. Anderson Silva was this, crazy showman that was able to do Matrix type stuff that nobody ever did before. I mean, I was in Brazil against Stephan Bonner when he just moved out of the way of the spin kick and then walked right back into the cage, and you go, what in the hell is this guy doing right now? But you know what? It got inside Stephan Bonner's head, and he admitted afterwards, like all of a sudden you feel like I have absolutely no business in the cage with this guy, and you break. And Chris Weidman just deserves all the credit in the world for never mentally breaking. He is literally one of the strongest, mentally, fierce men I have ever met on the face of this planet. I had an opportunity to have a dinner with him in Brazil, actually, at that same trip. He was down there as a guest fighter for Silva and Bonner. And Navid, man, he was so confident. He knew he was the guy. I'm the guy to beat Anderson Silva. I know it. I just need my chance. And as soon as they give it to me, I'll do it. And he kept that all the way through and even into the fight when we all thought, at least me personally, maybe I can't speak for the whole world, but I thought there would be a moment, no matter how strong this guy is 10 fights into his career, that he's going to get in the cage and there's going to be, 15,000 people going nuts. The bright lights are on. The spider is walking into the cage, and you just go, you have that one hesitation, that one little moment of hesitation. That's all it takes. Chris Weidman never had it. It was amazing.
Absolutely, John, and I think you bring up a good point that hasn't really got a lot of attention, and that is the mental side of the game of fighting. So much of it we hear is mental. Some people say it's even 70-30 mental talent-wise, and I think Chris Weidman's background in psychology, and a long time ago he did an interview about this where he went on a little losing streak when it came to his collegiate wrestling career, and he just decided, I'm not going to lose anymore. That's it. I'm just making the decision. And he's almost his own sports psychologist. We hear a lot of fighters and players going to sports psychologists, and that helping guys. I think Donald Cerrone is one of the guys who went, and that kind of helped turn his career around. And Chris Weidman is fortunate enough to be that guy for himself, at least until he loses. He's that guy for himself, and I think that mental toughness that he brought into that fight was very impressive because, as you mentioned, after the first round, I thought Chris Weidman was in a lot of trouble as well. We saw him easily get that takedown at the beginning of the first round, and after Anderson Silva started doing what Anderson Silva does, Chris Weidman didn't even really shoot for another takedown. He shot for one more takedown. Anderson Silva stuffed him, and I'm not even sure he really threw that takedown with the ferocity that he did the first time around. So I do think Anderson Silva got to him a little bit. Chris Weidman started standing with him. Regardless of what Ray Longo and those guys say, I don't think in a million years their game plan was to stand there and trade with Anderson Silva. The plan was to probably hit him a few times in the body, get him to respect the hands, and then go on the ground and take care of things down there. So very interesting fight, John, the way it played out. It's almost unfortunate. You almost feel kind of bad for Chris Weidman that it happened the way it did. I mean, obviously, it doesn't seem like he's too bothered by it, the way he won that fight. But you're right, John. I mean, Anderson Silva, we've seen him do this a lot of times. Maybe he toyed with his food a little too long in this situation before he got down to business. But the whole acting like, we've seen him do this before, but I think he just went overboard this time. The acting like he's hurt, he did that twice. Maybe if you do that one time, you can get away with it, but that almost takes away from his mobility, because if you go back and watch that, Chris Weidman lands that first shot, the one where Anderson Silva started to wobble and act like he was hurt. And then Weidman came with a 4-punch combination. And that is not something that you see typically in mixed martial arts. It's usually a 1-2-3 combo. And if you look at Anderson Silva and the way he moved out of the way of that first one, that second one, and that third one. And then he really didn't have any mobility for that fourth one. Most people don't throw that extra fourth punch. And I think what Weidman did was very unorthodox and perfect in the way that when he threw that third shot, he didn't really put mustard behind it. It was just kind of a throw out and a jab to get Silva to move, and then came in with that fourth punch. And I think that was a big difference in the fight and his unorthodox style that Anderson Silva and a lot of people were not expecting that fourth punch.
No, absolutely not. It was technically impressive. I mean, ironically, it's probably a punch that a coach would prefer he didn't throw, because that's what Anderson Silva is trying to get you to do, is to be, overextended and out of balance. But it paid off. You know what I mean? So I'm sure in the gym they were practicing, don't reach, don't get stretched out. And that's exactly what he did. But he had the confidence. And you're right. He threw that little flicking right hand to get the head moved in a different direction. It was brilliant. It was technically brilliant. I think it probably opened a lot of people's eyes to how good Chris Weidman really is. I mean, we knew about his ground skills, of course, his jiu-jitsu and his wrestling. But now we see that he's a technically good striker as well. And he's a big dude, too. So there's a lot of power behind it as well. So, just impressive work from Chris Weidman. You can't take enough. You can't give the guy enough credit, and should not take anything away. And, he always knew he was going to have to do it twice. He always knew there was going to be a rematch. Obviously, he said, look, we'll do it at Madison Square Garden. That didn't pay off, of course. But it's cool that he knew going in, I'm going to have to beat this guy twice to get everybody to know that it's a legitimate win. And, he's had so many wins. He deserves an immediate rematch at it. And I'm pumped to see this rematch, man. I really am. I know we're, we're still 5 months away from it, man. But I'm pumped. And I love the decision from Dana White to not put this on Super Bowl weekend, but to put it on the year-end card where the stories won't be split. That was his thinking, basically, is that, if I put this on the Super Bowl card, the sporting world is kind of busy already with the Super Bowl. This gets good coverage, but I don't want it to be part of something. I want it to be by itself. And also to leave Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate on that card. There was talk about maybe moving them to the Super Bowl. Yeah. I love the fact that we're going to get both these fights on one card on December 28th, and I think it's going to do huge numbers, because these are two fights that appeal to vastly different types of people. Huge demographic shifts. I mean, Ronda Rousey obviously appeals to women and a mainstream demographic. The fight fan is going to want to see this. Now it seems like even the casual fight fan is going to want to see this rematch. So I'm pumped about it. And I tell you what, I don't want to take anything away from Chris Weidman, but I still feel like I'm going to pick Anderson Silva in the rematch. I mean, early on, we're seeing the guy go on talk shows, and it's funny. A lot of people, right in the cage afterwards, he said, I respect Chris Weidman. I don't want a rematch. I'm not interested in championships anymore. And everybody just kind of scratched their head and went, What the hell is this guy talking about? Yeah. But I think Dana White hit the nail on the head and said, look, man, this dude just lost for the first time in forever. He doesn't know what it's like to get knocked out. He doesn't know what this feeling is like. He's going to go home. He's going to think about this, and it's going to light a fire. And, man, it didn't seem like it took more than a day or two. We were hearing reports immediately that, we saw the video. How about that video blog where we saw the kind of the emotional moment behind the scenes where he kind of teared up with his team around him. And then, you had the whole weird, Usher thing and all that. But but I think it got to him away, man.
Yeah, the Usher thing. I was like, what the hell is Usher giving Anderson Silva fight advice for? Jesus. Okay. But
that was weird.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And I cannot wait for this rematch either. There's so many storylines coming into this fight. And I don't think we see either Chris Weidman or Anderson Silva coming back with that same game plan. And back to your point, actually, John, when Anderson Silva was saying that stuff about I don't want to fight Chris Weidman again, he's the best guy now, and he's the champion. I think a lot of that, John, regardless of what Anderson Silva says, I'm sure he was embarrassed about what happened in that fight. It's one thing if you lose to a submission or on the ground, maybe even ground and pound, but when you're considered the greatest fighter of all time, you're out there completely embarrassing this kid. I mean, Anderson Silva was embarrassing Chris Weidman in that first round. He had his hands down. Chris Weidman landed some very hard punches to Anderson, and Silva just kind of smiled and waved him back in, said, hey, come on, give me a few more of those. So regardless of what anybody says, that has to be embarrassing to your ego, if nothing else, to have a guy standing there doing that. Then at the flip side, Anderson Silva showboats the way he does, and he got caught, and he got knocked out unconscious Herb Dean had to come over and he was grabbing it up. So regardless of what either one of those guys say, I think Chris Weidman was embarrassed about how things went in the first round, and I think Anderson Silva was even more embarrassed of what he did and what the end result was. So I think a lot of that had to do with him saying, I don't want to fight Chris Weidman again. It just would have made him look kind of foolish. Hey, you just, you were kind of playing around like a jackass and you got punched in the face and got knocked out, so it'd be stupid to say, hey, give me another shot at this guy. It's kind of like Vitor Belfort saying, if I wouldn't have landed that, if Anderson Silva wouldn't have landed that front kick on me, I definitely would have knocked this guy out. So I think there was a little bit of that going into it. So I didn't put too much weight behind it. But I don't think either one of these guys are going to come back the same. And Joe Rogan made a very good point about that, John, where he said nobody really has any idea of how much pressure that is to not only have one of the longest win streaks in UFC champion middleweight history, but to be as impressive and the greatest of all time as it is, and then at the same time, every 3 months having to defend that and have new contenders coming at you, and not to mention the fact that the guy's 38 years old.
No, I think there is something to all that. I mean, none of us really know what it feels like to be in that position, and there was a lot of pressure on him. And man, I've been down to Brazil multiple times. This guy was like the face of Nike, the face of the UFC. I mean, I've said it before, but it's crazy. People were selling UFC merchandise on the streets during the first Rio fight, and they weren't saying UFC. They were calling out like Anderson. So it was like, it was crazy, man. The popularity level that he had, and I'm sure the pressure that comes along with that. Who knows? I mean, I would never say, I heard people say that it was so much that he kind of intended to lose because he wanted that. I don't buy that. Maybe some subconscious, put pressure on him and forced him, to some difficulties for him. I buy that, but I don't think that he did it on purpose. But I think what you said is true, and I'm excited to see the rematch. I think it's going to come back totally different. I mean, I'll be honest. When he went down, there was a moment where I thought he was still playing, man. I thought he was joking that why is he falling down? That's not silly, But I think both guys are going to be different coming out. I mean, I still think we're going to see Anderson showboat a little bit. I think that's what he does. But I think the hands will be a little bit closer to the chin this time around. And the other thing too is he wasn't answering back as quickly as he usually does. It was like, he was bobbing and weaving, but not throwing back. He was just bobbing and weaving. I don't think we'll see that. I think he'll bob and weave a little bit, but the hands will be up. He'll throw the leg kick a lot more right away to really get to Weidman to cause some pain there and to slow down his mobility a little bit. And again, I'm not taking away from Chris Weidman. If he wins this fight again and sends Anderson Silva into retirement, it would not shock me one bit. But I think I'm still sticking with Anderson Silva in the rematch.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that about the showboating, John. I think we will see a lot less of that in the rematch. But at the same time, it's almost impossible for Silva's camp to really get that out of his system, because I mean that's a major reason that he's considered one of the greatest of all time, because he does drop his hands, he does the Matrix thing like you were saying, and comes back. But the guy's 38 years old, and we've been talking about this for his last 3 fights, is when will that age factor show up with Anderson Silva? And that is one of the big things that happens, John, is you lose your speed and mobility. And in this case, you could almost make an argument that he didn't have either one. He didn't have the mobility to get away from that fourth punch. And as you were mentioning, he was getting out of the way of some of those Chris Weidman shots, but we weren't seeing him just come back and attack and nail guys like we saw him do Stephan Bonner and Chael Sonnen and Forrest Griffin. So this is going to be it's almost like you were saying, very disappointing. This fight is still 5-6 months away. I wish this thing was happening in 2 weeks, but I don't think either one of us in a million years thought that Chris Weidman was going to knock Anderson Silva out on the feet, and I don't think his camp really wanted him to go with that game plan in the first place. So I think we're going to see both of these guys kind of go back to their old versions of themselves, where we see Chris Weidman doing the wrestling, taking Anderson Silva down, trying to get ground and pound, because really Weidman can already hang his hat on the fact that he knocked Anderson Silva out. No need to really go out there and expose himself in the second fight. He can say, hey, I already knocked him out in the first fight. This time I'm going to take him down, ground and pound, and finish things on the floor. But so many storylines coming into this fight. I cannot wait for this to take place.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it right now. It's funny because when Chris Weidman first won, his hand was being raised, my first thought was, man, we just lost the super fights. We're never going to see those super fights now. But then I went to the post-fight press conference. I stayed up. I did my work. I went to sleep for a couple hours. And I woke up, and the first thing that was on my mind when I woke up was, I cannot wait to see this rematch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't feel like we lost anything. I feel like now, the rematch, almost might be bigger. It actually means something. You know, I think you and I were both have always felt that the Anderson GSP fight really wasn't all that intriguing because of the drastic difference in body size. And while I wanted to see Anderson John Jones, I thought that was more impressive. At the end of the day, what would it really mean? You know, you've got a 38-year-old or 39-year-old, that one guy that was 185 pounds. So this thing is a fight that means something. This is not like some theoretical fight. This is a fight that means something. So I'm pumped for it.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Not only are neither one of us interested in seeing Anderson Silva GSP, GSP is not interested in seeing Anderson Silva face GSP. And I think probably George St. Pierre was more happier than Chris Weidman that Weidman actually got this fight out of the way and he can stop dodging questions and having to bob and weave his way around trying to fight Anderson Silva. But you're absolutely right. The thing about John Jones, Anderson Silva, I think everybody wants to see that fight, and it's something that should happen in a perfect world. But when you look at the age factor, it's almost unfair to Anderson Silva to have those two fight at this time. I mean, he is 38 years old. He's going to fight a guy who's 23, 24 years old. Things will never even out. And if you're Anderson Silva, you almost have to say, maybe I shouldn't take this fight. It wouldn't be good for us, and I'm sure we'd like to see that, but I could see him kind of skirting around that fight. But I know you got to get out of here, John. For Navid, Razi, our MMA weigh-in studios in downtown Dallas, an award-winning journalist for MMA Junkie and USA Today. That's going to do it for this episode of The Sixth Round. We will catch you next week.